Okay, well, thank you very much for tuning in. My name's Don Murray, and I'm here with Ken Bragg and Dean Hintz. We're scattered all over the world to bring you this how to create and share Inspire compliant data with FME. Okay.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining.
And good evening for those of you in North America. Well, not too
That's
many, I
right,
suppose.
or bigger. Okay. Okay, so in this we're going to talk about FME 2014 with Inspire, which is so this is like a preview of what you're going to see next week. We've been working with GML and Inspire data for a long time with FME, and in FME 2014 we're pretty excited to show you how we've made it even easier. So the big thing with FME 2014. No longer do you even have to work with things like XSLT or which used to be my favorite transformer, the XML templater. So
Yeah, Don, how are you dealing with that withdrawal of not having as much to do with templater? I know you really enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it, but I'm only ever allowed to use 10 transformers in a workspace. So now that gives me an extra one. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a quick look at the agenda. We're just going to quickly fly over SAFE and FME just because we always have people who are tuning in for the first time or don't use FME, just to give them a quick view of what we do. And then we're going to look at all the Inspire challenges from an FME 2014 perspective. First, consuming Inspire, and Ken's got a demo there. And then we're going to look at producing Inspire schema transformation, of course, which is valuable both going into Inspire and when you're consuming Inspire to get the data back into a form that you can directly use. We're also going to spend some time on format geometry and Annex 2 and Annex 3, so we're pretty excited about that. Many folks out there have questions about how to produce and consume Annex 2 and Annex 3 themes. Validation, and Ken's worked hard to set up a really nice bonus, I guess we can say, for you folks who have tuned in. And last but not least, we're going to talk about web services. And throughout, we have on the webinar there, you have your question and answer at the bottom of your GoToWebinar tag. So feel free to ask questions anytime, and we'll answer them as we go along with the recap. Then there we are, and this is probably the only time that Dean is the guy with the most hair on his head. So it's a pretty tough crowd from that perspective.
Yeah. Just trying to compensate by having more hair on the lower half of my head there.
Yeah, yeah. And me, I'm just a lost cause. So there you go. So.
And I have less than what's shown in the picture, that's for sure.
So Ken used Photoshop to give himself more hair.
Yeah.
Right on.
And this is our professional services staff who it's 1 a.m. in Vancouver, and so Dean and I are going to be answering the questions, but you can see that most of them indeed do have a really great head of hair. And on the right there shows you exactly how to enter questions, and we will get back to you. And if we don't get back to you during the webinar, we'll be sure to answer them all after.
And I guess Don, they all look pretty happy because of the new GML writer, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. So if you've been following SAFE for a while or you're new, you'll notice that our web page has just recently changed in the last month, and now we talk about connect, transform, and automate. And again, this is just to drive home exactly what we do at SAFE. The connect part is talking about how we connect to many different systems. Traditionally, we've referred to those systems as formats, but as time goes on, formats means less and less. More and more things are, web services, web applications, databases, all these things that are live systems. So you don't necessarily think of connecting them as a format. And of course, transformation, schema mapping, data manipulation, that's what we've been doing since the beginning. And it's all about automation. You build a workflow once and you deploy it, and now you've got a nice automated workflow. And Ken set up a nice thing you're going to see a little bit later, a web service for you that enables you to automate a very key Inspire task. And there's three of us, and we're like a barber quartet minus one person. And the idea with FME is, again, just to create harmony between data and application. So there you are. We're now about 105 people actually. So yeah, and so we have partners and customers all over the world. And basically any kind of data is what FME is all about, spatial or non-spatial. And you see all the formats there. And with respect to Annex 3, you see buildings there, BIM and 3D. So we've been doing that for quite some time. So adding support for Annex 3 data was not, you know, a big leap for us. Also, you see raster data there, which is covers, you know, much of the Annex 2 stuff, as well as, of course, with buildings, you need to have the textures to really have a nice, realistic building model, and of course, that's important for Annex 3 as well.
I think a good point.
Oh.
I was just going to say, Don, just to jump in, that even though not all these data types are necessarily used directly or covered by an INSPIRE schema, often you need to get your source data from somewhere, and so like you might use LiDAR data to build a tin or an elevation model that you end up loading into Annex 2. So I think that's really a big strength of FME, as you're pointing out, this rich array of data sources that you've got.
That's right. That's right. No, that's a great point, Dean. Okay, time for our first poll, because we like to get started off with a poll. So the first question is, are you using FME today to prepare INSPIRE data? So I will launch that poll. Okay. And the questions are, no, I'm new to FME. The second one is, I use FME, but not really for INSPIRE. The third question is, yes, I use FME already for INSPIRE data preparation. And the fourth one is, what is INSPIRE?
Looks like everybody knows.
It looks like everybody knows. So we'll give you a couple seconds here. So that also shows that nobody's in the wrong webinar. So, so there you go. So we'll close that poll now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we'll share the results, and you'll see that 27% of you are new to FME. So thanks for tuning in this morning. The second group is I use FME, but not really for INSPIRE. So that's about half of you. And the third set is the other quarter is I use FME, but yes, I already use FME for data preparation. So we have a quarter of you using FME, and half of you using FME, but not for INSPIRE. So there we go. So hopefully after the end of this webinar, you'll see how you can use FME or INSPIRE. Good. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at, and Ken's going to do a quick demo here, is just consuming INSPIRE data. So imagine you're just a user. You know there's all this great INSPIRE data out there, and you want to simply leverage it to use it in your own workflows to combine with your own data, or you just want to use it for for some purpose on its own. So there's a couple things there. The first thing is the new data inspector. Enables us to view 2D or 3D data, vector, raster, or sort any kind of data with INSPIRE. And we first demonstrated some of this with the web services webinar that we did last August. Take it away there, Ken.
Okay, thanks, Don. I'm just going to switch to my other screen here for a sec.
Perfect.
Right, so I'm going to start with a blank slate here using the FME Data Inspector. The first thing I'm going to show really quickly is just reading from a WFS service. So WFS service, for those who aren't aware, is a web service that is used to stream GML. In this case, it's INSPIRE compliant GML. So I'm just going to add the data set to view. I've chosen the format WFS service. And you'll see in the parameters here that we have a URL to the WFS service. I can authenticate if I need to. I think I don't actually need to authenticate in this particular one. And when we click on this feature types button, we'll see all of the Annex themes that are available in this particular service. So I'm going to choose cadastral parcels in this case. And I'm going to just clear out my filter expression. I'll come back to that in a second. and I'll just let this go. So this is reading from a WFS service. I do want to thank Olivier from Vermees who made this data available to us. This is data, cadastral data from Perpignan in France, and it's just loading up here. So we're reading the WFS service. The FME client is doing the communication through the WFS protocol, and then we get GML back. And FME has always been a good tool for reading any kind of GML. We now ship these schema files for all of the different themes, so FME can right away parse and interpret that inspired GML. So here's our cadastral data from a little area in Perpignan. I can click on one of the cadastral parcels and you'll see that FME understands that this is a multiple geometry. We have multiple named geometries inside this particular parcel. And I've got this showing, we've got a relatively new feature in the data inspector where I can use a map background from another web service. In this case, this is Mapbox. So this is a Mapbox web service in the background, which I really, really like. Yeah. Another thing we can do now with this WFS, or sorry, we have been able to for a long time, is include a filter expression. So I'll just pop one of those in there. This is actually reading a WFS service on FME's server. As Dean will show at the end, FME's server can now support the filter expression queries when we want to ask to filter what we're reading from this WFS service. So now I'm just going to read when the property ID equals this value right here, and it really works the same way. And we'll just read a single parcel from that property data from that WFS service. Just to make it quick, that's what the output looks like right there. There it goes. And now we have a single parcel data.
So
Parcel feature.
Where's the server running, Ken?
This server, the FME server, is running on FME Cloud, and the data itself, I believe, is Dean in Amazon RDS database. Is that right, Dean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, running.
Yeah.
Second thing I want to show really quickly, and this is coming from the Danish Geodata Denmark, or GST as they're known. Our good friend there, Peter Lawland, has created an Atom download service. So this is a relatively new specification that Inspire allows you to serve data through this Atom specification. And the Atom feed, here it is here. Think of it as like a GRSS feed, very similar to a GRSS feed. And inside this feed, we have all these FTP links to zip files. In this case, one for each municipality or commune, as they're known in Denmark. So it's like an RSS feed of zip files, and each zip file contains a GML file. So we're going to look at a workspace here that actually Peter Lawland helped us with. And this workspace is using the GRSS reader to read from that web service. This example is an article on FMEpedia. If you just search for Atom on FMEpedia, you'll see this example. So we're reading in this workspace from this XML feed right here. And this right here, we're using the GRSS reader. The workspace includes parameters for the username and password. You can get an account just by going to the Geodata Denmark website, create an account for yourself. So we insert the password into the link that we're reading from the XML file. And then FME uses my favorite transformer, the HTTP fetcher, to pull down the zip file. FME will pull down the zip file, we drop it into a directory, use the feature reader to read the inspired GML. I'm just going to run this while I'm talking. To read the inspired GML right out of the zip file directly. We've been able to read from zip files for quite a while. At this point, if all you want is the GML, that's what will come out of these two ports here. So the feature reader is reading the GML from the zip file that we're downloading. I'm just sending it off to the viewer. But of course, this is FME, so we can continue along and write out the Inspire data into any format that FME supports. So in this particular workflow, I'm writing it out to a shapefile. At the same time, I'm also popping the GML into the viewer. So this should be done in just a sec here. I've got it actually open in the viewer here right now. So here's the road. In this case, this is the road link and road. It's the road network theme coming live to you from Geodata Denmark. And as I mentioned, there was a parameter for which commune or which municipality in Denmark to read from. And in this case, it was the Ballerup is the name of the commune that we read from. So there's, again, the INSPIRE GML data in the viewer. This was the GML directly with the map box background. And you'll see in the directory here where I just created a directory for the shapefile. Here's the shapefiles that we pulled out of that Atom service. So to kind of sum up, FME has no problem reading any INSPIRE compliant GML. You can do whatever you like with it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Okay, I'll just pass back to you, Don. Just back to the slides.
And it's amazing how much better it all looks when you have a background map and you can see that the roads actually line up on the roads.
Yeah, I love that. I love those background maps. Of course, ArcGIS Online, we can use Mapbox and a couple of others, I believe.
Yeah. And well, can we use pretty much any FME format as well, right?
You could, absolutely. If anybody had their own data, they could use their own data as the background map.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're reading it. One of the other challenges, of course, is you get your INSPIRE data, and you want to move it in your own system, or you have data in your own system and you want to move it into the INSPIRE schema. And that's what this slide's showing here. On the left-hand side, you have parcel data, source parcel data, and you want to get it into the cadastral parcels. How do you do that mapping? And FME makes it very simple. You still have to understand the INSPIRE schema, of course, because you have to understand how your data maps into the INSPIRE schema, but you don't have to understand anything about XML-based tools like XSLT or things like that. So anybody who understands the data with FME will be able to do the mapping. And in FME 2013, I always went on about, and I would scare Dean because I would talk about, oh yeah, we can do that. We would use the XML templater. Of course, that wasn't incorrect. It's just that would, in some cases, be a rather large body of work. And now what we've done is we've made our INSPIRE writer and our GML writer, in fact, be XSD driven. So if you specify the XSDs, then the writer is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, just leaving it to you just to do the attribute mapping. So the level of effort has gone down by at least 2 orders of magnitude, wouldn't you say, Dean?
Yeah, I mean, now you can focus on doing what FME users love to do best, and that's working within Workbench with transformers rather than within really large kind of scary-looking templates. And
yeah.
you know, staying up late to.
Yeah, and you had an example of a workspace. You're not going to show it today, but there was one workspace as you were working through all this. It used to have, what was it, 100 transformers or 80 transformers, and effectively.
Yeah, about 60 odd ones, which are basically replaced with 2 or 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so
I'll jump to
the next slide.
Actually, I'll jump to that demo of schema mapping, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably what's up next on the next slide.
Okay, so everyone seeing my workbench?
We do.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly run through some of the schema mapping tools in FME. For those who don't know FME very well, mapping feature types is really simple in FME. We just represent layers or feature types with these little brown boxes here, and we can just connect them up. So this is a workspace that creates the cadastral parcels theme, and it's reading from the French EDGO format. Again, thanks to Verames for providing this data. So to connect 2 layers together, I mean, that's probably the simplest case of all. You'll see we're reading two layers from the EDIGO, and we're writing out to a single feature type. So that's feature type mapping. Renaming attributes in FME, very, very simple. We use the attribute copier transformer. So I'll just pop this one open. So if we think we have source data with various attribute names, and for some of them, we simply need to rename the attributes into the Inspire attribute name. So the attribute copier can be used to do all this renaming en masse. You can import all of the distinct values from a data set with this import button in the bottom. So that's rename. What we call augmentation, sometimes we need to add something to the data to create Inspire compliant data. The attribute creator is a transformer we can use to create a new attribute, and you'll see that in this workspace. Dean, I believe you created this workspace, is that right?
Well, if it works, then I'll say I made
yeah.
it.
So in this workspace, he's hard-coded the date, and he's defined the area units as meters squared. So that's one type of augmentation, or adding something to the data. We also created a universal ID on all the features using FME's UUID generator transformer. So a couple of examples there. Reclassifying, I just pulled these out of another Inspire workspace actually, but you'll see the value mapper in FME is a transformer that does a lookup, let's say. It reads from an attribute and it maps the values into new values. So in this case, Dean realized that where it said Italy in the source data, it actually needed to refer to the Italian language. So he mapped Italy to Italian when he runs into it, Croatia to Croatian, and so on. So value mapper in FME, another very powerful transformer for doing schema mapping. In a sense, we could say coordinate transformation is schema mapping. So the reprojector transformer here, we're using to reproject the data from the lat long coordinate system into the ETRS-89. In this case, we refer to that with the EPSG 4258 coordinate system. That would be the same as ETRS-89. Handling geometry. Oh, I can see I did skip a slide, didn't I, Don? But we'll come. Don can sum up with that next slide.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah. The other point Don will make in a second is that for Inspire, we need to create this complex nested name geometries. So we have the geometry property setter in FME, which lets you name the geometry that's already on the feature. So here, the cadastral polygons are being named geometry. And then we need to create an inside point for each of them. That's part of the requirement. So we created a point from each polygon with the inside point replacer, and we rename that geometry reference point, aggregate them together. Now the writer, which Dean will come to in a minute, it knows to take that aggregated geometry and create the proper nested complex geometry that Inspire requires.
Yeah.
So how many features does that geometry go to, Ken?
That will create one feature.
Yes.
Sorry, is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I was just trying to underline the point that often when you're reading from a GIS, you may only have one geometry per feature, but Inspire in many cases requires multiple geometries per feature. So this is a good example of that.
Of how to do that. Yeah.
For relatively more complex schema mapping, we have the schema mapper transformer in FME, which lets you refer to a table or a database that defines all of the schema mapping. And in that table, we can define attribute renaming, we can define feature type renaming, we can define attribute value remapping. So I created a super simple example of that here. This is an Excel file that defines some attribute renaming. So if we run into the name attribute in the source, we change it into this Inspire name here. And you can use this mechanism if you want somebody that really understands the data to define all of the schema mapping in a nice simple table. They just set up the from and to, and then you the FME expert, use the schema mapper transformer to refer to that table and define the mapping. So that's another way to do it if you want to do all of your schema mapping in one single transformer. Okay,
so another nice thing about that, of course, is is then somebody can do it in another tool if they want. You know, if they're really good with Excel and they just know how to map the names across, then they can do that without opening Workbench.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So here's the slide I skipped, but should I hand it back to you, Don? Yeah.
You certainly covered it all. So this is a good summary for when people visit the deck later. So that's good. So next, yeah, so there you go. So yeah, so with FME, you can read and write over 300 formats. So obviously, when you're working with Inspire, the ability to read 300 formats is important when you're getting your data into Inspire, because it's difficult to predict. And for all the organizations across Europe, the data is going to come from a wide variety of sources. So the ability of FME to read data from all these different systems is a big deal. Particularly when you start thinking about the different Annex 2 and Annex 3. Again, you're going to have more data systems and themes there. And FME's had an Inspire reach since 2012, but in 2014, we have our new Inspire GML Writer that, as Dean, or as Ken just showed, can support complex Inspire schemas. You'll notice the mapping there was very, very simple. And he was also able to build features with multiple geometries in Inspire very, very easily. So and we're going to see more of this coming up. And there's a great splash screen from 2014. Okay, so Dean's now going to take it away, and we're going to get into more complex mapping, showing things like our new null support in FME, which of course is also important for GML. And sad to say, the XML templater is no longer needed for GML where you have or XML where you have the schema, but in cases where you don't have schema, the XML templater is still useful for things like metadata. So take it away there, Dean.
Okay, yeah, as soon as I am made presenter, I'll... Okay, here we go. So hang on to your seats here. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind, but I am pretty pumped about this, Don. As you said, maybe I should admit this, but you did scare me from time to time with what was maybe you thought was possible with Templator, and certainly might have been possible, but it's kind of like having to write your own writer, every time a new format requirement comes along. So the cool thing now about the GML writer, as you've pointed out, is that really it's not just Inspire, but basically any XSD out there that is valid GML, we should be able to write to and validate against. So it really is powerful, and now you can basically work at the data restructuring and geometry restructuring level, and you don't really have to be an XML architect to do it the way you did with Templator. So let's look at an example of that. I'm going to pick up where Ken left off. What I've basically done, can everybody see my workspace here? I'll just zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
Good. So I've deleted the writer, and I'm going to show you how easy this is to hook up. Now, of course, Ken has done the hard work here of restructuring the data so that we have various fields available and the geometries built. But if this was the old way of doing things, we would still have to go through an XML templater. We'd have to find some sample data or generate templates from an XSD, so it'd still be a lot of work. So now all I have to do is I just go add writer, and we have the brand new Inspire format, and I'll just choose an output folder for this. Let's just say out, an output file. And now you can see if I'd go by themes or XSD, because it's a fixed schema, I can choose a specific theme that I want to write to, in this case cadastral parcels. And it's a two-step process, so it's just going to add my writer for now. And then I have to go in here, import feature type. And the one little trick here is you actually have to delete that path. So we can make this workflow slightly smoother in the future. But if you don't delete that path, you don't get any schemas. It took me a little while to figure that one out. So anyway, here we just want cadastral parcel and zoning. So just grab those two, and you can see they just pop on the screen. There's zoning, there's parcels, and we connect them up. And I'll connect this guy up. And before I run this, I just want to point out a couple of key points. First of all, this has got the whole Inspire schema on it. Not all of these fields are necessarily required, but that includes both optional and required items. Secondly, you can see the basic structure here of how we model the nested objects that are coming in from the schema. So you can see inspire.identifier.local ID. So that just means that local ID is within identifier, and that's an element within the Inspire object. And the other thing I'm going to point out here, and I'll come back to, is this data type is very important, particularly when it comes to the geometry stuff. So the XML geometry, as Ken spent a bit of time on, we've got this geometry called just plain old geometry here. That's where the polygon goes in this case. And then we have another one down here where the reference point goes. And if you find that your output has no geometry on it, you're getting your fields but not the geometries, it's because you haven't actually named it exactly like what's supposed to be on the schema. So that's kind of a key point. Now if I go back to the attribute copier here, Ken pointed out earlier that you could import the field names, but if you've already imported the schema on the destination and this thing's hooked up, then you don't have to worry about doing any imports or typing. You can just pull it in and then grab what the equivalent field is from your source data. So obviously you'd have to understand what the source data schema means, and you'd have to know something about the destination Inspire stuff. But it is a lot easier once that schema is available. It's no longer that black box that you have with Templater. And let me just point out again, I think Ken did spend a bit of time on this, so I don't want to belabor it, but yeah, here basically we're setting the geometry name, but sometimes you have to set traits. So if we had to set an ID or a type field or something that was going to go on the geometry, we could set it from a trait from an attribute. Okay, so why don't I just go ahead and run this. Everything should basically be hooked up. I'm just going to hit run. And then when it's done, I'll go to the output folder. Open containing folder. And you notice I'm just using the GML reader.
Yeah, and you can just see now the exercise is reduced to doing the mapping from the source fields to destination fields, and you can also see that, boy, it's just screaming for a graphical tool. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a graphical tool that could show a tree view of the schema on one side and the table of the other side? And who knows, it could happen.
Yeah, stranger things have happened, eh, Don?
Yeah. We're just gearing up for 2015 while we're just releasing 2014. So our work is not done. Oh, time for a poll. So that must mean I should stop talking here. Okay. So the poll is, what other tools are you using now for Inspire data preparation? So we'll launch this one here. And the choices are custom coding or XSLT processing, other commercial GML transformation tools, open source tools, FME all the way. I'm not really involved in Inspire yet. And so far it looks like 20% are custom coding or XSLT, 10% are other commercial GML, a quarter of you are using open source tools, a quarter are using FME, and about 36% of you are not involved in Inspire yet. So I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then share the results with Ollie out there, so you can see the results right there. So good, a very good split on right across the board on that one. So now I will hide the results, and we will go back to Dean or Ken. Okay.
Well, Don, you can say a couple words about Annex 2 and 3, and then I'll jump into some
Absolutely.
more demos.
Absolutely. Annex 2 adds supports for raster themes such as DEMs and orthophotos. And with FME, we've been reading and writing raster data for about 10 or more years, probably 15 years. And so Annex 2, aside from the DEM or the orthophoto, there's a sidecar file that has the metadata about the document or the image, and so that for Annex 2 or Annex 3, that was very little work for us at SAFE to support. And Annex 3 is very exciting because one of the things that we've most recently been working on it at with SAFE with FME is buildings and 3D. And in fact, in FME 2014, if you tune in next week, you're gonna find out that we actually have a Revit reader and for reading buildings. We also are working hard on an IFC reader and writer, and of course we have really great City GML support for as well. And so all these play really nicely into the Annex 3 3D building theme that Dean is going to talk about pretty quickly here.
Yeah, coming right up. So, well, first off, I'm just going to jump in here. I'll just say a couple words. Don's kind of covered the Annex 2 stuff. And we saw some examples from Ken as well about atom feeds. So that seems to be largely how Annex 2 is dealt with. A lot of it is raster data or point coverage elevation data, things like that. And so not a lot of new schemas really. It's just basically a lot of the bread and butter of what we've done with things like FME server right from the beginning in terms of the data distribution side. So if either it's just a link on a website, or you may have a GUI like that, which ends up being, let's say, a B box that does an extraction from a spatial database somewhere and streams the data down. So yeah, we're good both with reading and writing that. And as Don pointed out, we've got lots of experience with it. Just as a quick example, I'll pop up a little bit of Annex 2 data. I grabbed off one of the websites that was on that slide, and just pop open an inspector here. Yeah, so this is just northern Italy. It helps if I turn off the background map here.
Which background map are you using there, Dean? Was that
Stammen maps? Yeah.
Stammen maps.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's. Try a different data inspector. That one got busy. So. There we go. So this is just northern Italy, and you can kind of see the width of one of the mountain ranges there, and some of the point data, and also some stats about the data, the whole data set as a whole. And so we can easily consume that data as well as serve it up.
Right. Right. We can do things like resample, reproject, mosaic, all those standard raster kind of operations.
Yeah. And for those of you who have a yearning for XML templater, you can use that to generate some of this the metadata for those data sets.
Well,
so now moving on to Annex 3, this is really want to spend most of my time on the sort of annex, the upcoming annexes. Now Annex 3 is big. It's got lots of stuff in there, utilities, etc. So we don't really have time in the tight amount of time today. I mean, I think we have enough material here, Don. We could have easily gone 2 or 2.5 hours.
Yeah, especially you or me, Dean.
So the only way that Ken could get me to talk a little bit less was to promise that we're going to have a subsequent webinar coming up in a month or two. So we'll get to cover some of the web services in that time. But anyway, in the meantime, there's two aspects to buildings, and I learned a fair bit in the last couple of weeks preparing for this. You'll notice that on the top of this slide here, the timestamp is 2013 December 10th. So that's basically around the date that the latest version of the building spec was published, version 3.0 for 3D buildings as a whole. And so these specifications are still evolving, and once they're finalized, then we'll be able to make sure we test and support them. Now, the basic idea with buildings is that it is based on CityGML, but it is essentially its own format, because while the logical structure and UML and all that is based on CityGML, it's still different enough. Like you can see, a lot of the field names are different, some of the object names are different. So you can't just take a buildings file, an Inspire buildings file, and read it with CityGML. So it's going to be a completely, essentially a brand new format, and anybody who knows anything about 3D knows how complicated that can get. So not to say that we won't support it, but there are a whole lot of tools out there in industry, whether it be Autodesk or other tools, that are set up to work with CityGML that just won't work with Annex 3 buildings out of the box. So what that brings us to is the Inspire ADE for CityGML. And I was a little bit wondering how this was going until I heard back from our good friend Tatjana Kunstner at the Technical University of Munich. And she actually was kind enough to fire me her latest draft of the this buildings 3D buildings ADE schema. And so what this allows anyone to do is to extend CityGML. That's what ADE stands for, Application Domain Extension, with the Inspire specific fields. So, and this is part of the 9.3.2. So, it's near the end of the Inspire spec, and so it is an officially recognized alternative to using just straight up 3D buildings GML. So let's have a quick look at what that looks like. Yeah, so it's 9.3.2.1 is the section that covers that if you want to read up on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so here it's a pretty complicated workspace, Don.
Right.
Hold on to your horses here.
So if I understand this, it's going to take a CityGML file and produce a new CityGML file that is Inspire compliant, because it has the Inspire ADE. Use the Inspire ADE.
Yep. So really, all you got to do is specify the ADE file. In this case, I got this Core 3D XSD there.
Yep.
And then you have to, basically when you add the writer, you specify that path. When you import the feature types, you specify that path. And then what you'll notice is that when you go in here, not only do you get the CityGML fields, but you get all these Core 3D fields. Right. And that includes, you can see here, Inspire ID, identifier, etc. So there's a bunch of Inspire specific fields.
Okay.
So when I go ahead and run this, so basically, and let me just quickly show you here, this is like what Ken showed you earlier, basic schema mapping to populate IDs.
Yeah.
And then creating some default values for things like lifespan version or units of measure. So I haven't completely populated this because this is just a draft schema, but just to goes to show that we can, in fact, read this data, and you can see that it's actually fully textured. And thanks to some of our folks, this is actually data from the 3D IMGeo group up in the Netherlands, GeoNovum. Yep. And when you actually click on a building here, you can see some of the attributes. And then when I click on node geometry, where a lot of the additional fields are, you can see these Core 3D fields, including the local ID stuff. So this stuff is all specifically for Inspire.
Right. And so this,
there you go.
So that any CityGML tool will be able to work with Inspire compliant Annex 3 building data in this way.
Right, and who knows, if you want, you can publish this as a web service and transmit it that way. So yeah, so you're basically benefiting from all of this 3D infrastructure we've built to support things like CityGML. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, Don, reading, whether it's 3D Studio, Revit, what have you, and then being able to populate Annex 3 buildings.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's I'm
That's
pretty
exciting.
pumped about that.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
So, and then down the home stretch here, oh, we think it's back over to Ken because he's got
Yeah,
some
and
magic to show us on validation. So what's,
yeah,
you
and
know,
it's
what's the
already
point
been
of producing all this stuff if you can't validate it? So
That's right.
Ken,
That's
show us
right.
how that works.
Yeah. And we've already had some questions on this, so this is great.
Yeah,
Okay.
just bear with. Actually, I think, can you make me presenter again, please, Dean?
All right. I've got mute here. No. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. Am I showing the right screen? Are you guys seeing Workbench?
We see
I'm
your
seeing a reminder about the webinar.
Now we see gray.
There we go.
There's a workbench.
Okay. So in the simplest case, and probably the most powerful thing that's possible here, is the XML validator in FME. And this transformer has been around since, I think, 2012. Excuse me. And the XML validator, fairly simple transformer. I've created parameters for these in this workspace, but it lets you pass in an XML file, and then it passes in an XSD file or an XML schema file to validate your file with. So in this particular workspace, and I have something very similar to this running on FME Cloud, but I'll run it locally first. We're going to run through the cadastral data that we've been producing in these demos, and we're just going to validate it against the schema. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that FME has a ton of other tools and transformers that help you do data validation. So most importantly, the schema validation against the Inspire XSD files. But I want to run through quickly a couple of other types of validation that we can do. First one, I just created a couple fairly simple tests here. I'm going to test that the GML ID is not empty, it's not null, it's not missing, all of that stuff. Anything that I find that's a problem, it will get flagged, and then the features will continue on to other tests. I'm going to test that the area value attribute is greater than 0. That will also check that it's a number at the same time and that it's been set to something. We can look at geometry in FME, lots of tools for validating geometry. So these cadastral things were aggregates, as we remember. They're points inside polygons, so just break them apart, check them through the geometry validator, and then continue on in our testing. All of these tests, anything that fails the tests, I'm actually using our good old XML templater to create an HTML report so it's easy to look at. So I'll just go ahead and run this now. And you may have noticed I've kind of cheated and created some purposely bad data within this workflow here. So I'm just running it locally. And what we'll see here is I made a little report. Here's the HTML file. Oops, wrong screen. So that's what comes out. And you'll see that we can show which file the errors were in. Here's some geometry errors. It tells us which GML ID had a polygon that was self-intersecting in 2D. We also were missing some area attributes, and then we had a whole bunch of non-unique GML IDs. So that's of course a no-no in Inspire. I'll run it against some good data in the browser version of this. So what I actually created here, just made a little web form that lets us run the same validation test on FME Cloud. And we're going to make this little web service available to all of you. So up on FME server, on FME Cloud, I've put the XSD files in there in advance. So we can choose which theme to validate. I think I'll start with one of the geographical names themes. And then we can upload an XML file to this FME Cloud. It's going to run that workspace. It's going to do that same schema validation. So I'll just choose a file that I have locally here. I'll choose this one, geographic names, and I'll submit it. So we're uploading that Inspire GML file with geographic names to our machine on FME Cloud. So it's just uploading still. The workspace runs fairly quickly. So once this file's up there, the workspace reads the XSD files, which I have sitting on FME Cloud. The workspace writes out an HTML file, and there it is in my browser there. So that tells me that this cadastral parcel file passed the schema validation, so there's no line numbers and no columns. I think you may have noticed in the other one, when it's a schema validation that failed, we give the line number because that's really the only way to find where your issue is in the Inspire GML file. So I think that's validation.
I was just going to say that yeah, you could have those geometry or value range as part of the report too, if there were intersections and problems with the data.
That's right.
Yeah, anything. There's lots of customers, lots of partners using FME to do some kind of QA validation on data. So really anything you want to test, schema, values, attribute names, just about that values are within a range, all of these things are, of course, possible. Okay, so where are we? Back to...
We're going to leave this service up there so that anybody can use this. We'll continue to expand it as time goes on to do other themes and...
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, it's using a relatively new feature in FME Server, the resources feature, and that's gives you the ability to upload files that sit there on FME Server for use in any workspace. Okay, so who am I handing to? Back to Dean.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so we're gonna wrap things up here in a minute. Thanks, Ken, for that on validation. So that's a clear critical value there. Don, do we have a poll question? Do we have any more poll questions?
We have a poll question right now, so we'll start that. So the poll is, what is your job when it comes to Inspire? Okay, so I'll launch this poll, and the choices are schema mapping your data into Inspire, translating data into Inspire GML or XML, providing Inspire web services, manager of Inspire compliance at a higher level, or consuming Inspire data. So here we go. So, wow, there's not a lot of variability here. So lots of people are schema mapping, translating data, or providing web services. Quarter viewer managers, and then 29% are consuming. So I'll close this poll now, and then I'll share the results with you. And there's the result.
Wow, quite an even distribution, isn't it?
Yeah.
A little bit of everything. So it's good that FME can handle it all. So.
Okay, so now back to you, Dean, and let's take a look at those slides.
Yeah, so the last topic I sort of begged that we could at least give you guys a teaser on is the web services. We did have a webinar, I think back late summer, which talked about consuming, but this is really about producing web services with FME. And I like this slide that I think Don was working on that talks about, this basically sums it up in one picture. And really the key here, which it's a bit late, or I don't know if it's early in the morning to get your head around this, but you might be used to the idea of FME reading and writing data sets, whether it be file or database. But really what you have to get your head around is the idea of FME reading and writing messages. So it's not just about a workspace translating data, but it's actually a workspace that accepts a message request and transmits the appropriate response once it's published to server. And so, our goal here is actually making a workspace that becomes your WFS and handles all that messaging.
Yeah. So Dean's going to show a workspace that he has where basically the URL request for get capabilities is handled. The same workspace handles the request for describe feature type. The same workspace handles the request for get feature. And using the data streaming capability of FME Server, we're able to put up a WFS service that is 100% authored within a workspace. So this is pretty exciting. So Dean's just bringing that up now.
Yeah. So again, sort of the high level is that this workspace actually functions as our WFS. Now, I'm not saying that it covers all possible functionality that you might want, but it basically gives you complete control over how your WFS behaves. And we're happy to make this available. We'll probably soon have an FME article on it. You can download it and then extend it as you wish. So I guess a good place to start is what's the URL that might drive this thing?
Yeah.
Well, the input to this might just be simply this text line down here. I don't know if you can see it very well. And that's just the URL that has things like, this is the WFS server, so it's just the path to that workspace on FME server. Service equals WFS, request equals get feature, etc. How do we capture that? All that stuff just comes in as a parameter. So if I actually look at the workspace parameters on the right side here, you can see that the request, I just have a drop list for the different requests because those are the requests that are valid. And the same thing, service is WFS, filter, in this case it's blank, version. So all of these are just different parameter values. And I guess at the high level, how I've organized this workspace is that the main workspace here handles all the messaging traffic, and then I have custom transformers for each of my data themes that actually handle the data restructuring and queries to the database over there on Amazon. And ultimately, the GML writer does the data streaming back. Now, those of you familiar with FME Server, normally you only have one output feature type typically. In this case, I've got three. I've got the GML writer for transmitting the data, but I have the text line writer, text line in and text line out to handle the messaging. Mm-hmm. So let's just have a look at what actually happens. If I choose Get Capabilities here and I run this workspace, we can just see the data flow coming through here. And here, this test filter, what that does is it fires, it goes, okay, what's the request? The request is Get Capabilities. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to actually build a Get Capabilities document with these elements in it. Now, those of you who are homesick for templater, you can see I actually have a templater here to build dynamically this Get Capabilities document. Now, if I wanted to, I could just use a static document as well, but I just wanted to show that we can actually build the messaging on the fly where it makes sense. Yeah. And if it's described feature type, we just go over here and we go, well, which feature type is it? And if it's named place, then we go and get the geographic names XSD. And if it's cadastral parcels, we get the cadastral parcels XSD and we stream that out the text line writer. And then finally, if it's cadastral parcels, we pass the various B-box parameters or filters, because we were showing how that worked earlier. Ken showed that. And that will basically, I'm not going to get into the details of how the filter and the B-box processor work, but within this parcels custom transformer, basically what we do is we parse the URL or the XML from a post expression to get essentially the elements for the where clause, so where A equals B, and then we parse out the XY min max and build a B-box polygon, and then we fire that off to PostGIS. So here's the PostGIS server on Amazon. There's the table, and then what we do is this is actually talking to it right now, and you can see that we're just basically building a where clause with the string concatenator, and then we pass the bounding box, and we only are interested in stuff within that, and that just gets us the features that we want. And the real power, I mean, lots of people are a bit skeptical maybe about WFS, but the real power of WFS is when you can actually zero in just on the features you want. Yeah. And so you really got to support that querying. And this is something that we did not support in our out-of-the-box WFS from a few years back. We did not have that filter support. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead, Don.
The WFS that Ken used earlier was that workspace running.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I can go into here I can choose, let's say, named place, and have in this case use a search envelope, and it's only going to get those features back. So I'll let that run. And while that's going, let's just go back to the PowerPoint and see. I think that's basically the last demo.
Yeah.
And so, again, that was just kind of to whet your appetite. We're going to have more time to discuss web services in a bit, but here you can just see I did a spatial query. Ken did a couple of XML filter queries earlier. I turned off my background so it doesn't look too snazzy. Ken's got that down. But yeah, you just get the data you want, and basically, we may not have implemented all the filters, but you can extend to WFS 2.0 filters, whatever you want to build, you can build into that workspace.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great.
And I guess the last thing I'll say is you can also you can also do WCS, WPS the same way. So.
Good stuff. And so there you go. So in today's webinar, we've covered consuming Inspire both through WFS as well as through an Atom feed. Ken and Dean went through the schema transformation. That's the hard part of how you map your data into the Inspire schema. And with the Inspire Writer, it's way easier than it was before. Publishing to Inspire again. They went through that with the data validation, of course, being a key part of that, because you need to make sure that what you're publishing is actually valid. And Ken's created a web service on validation that we'll add other themes to and continue to improve. So if you have that URL, give that a try. And we talked about Annex 2 and Annex 3. Lots of questions we've had over the last little while about how FME is going to support Annex 2 and Annex 3. So Dean addressed that. And one quick sort of teaser on where we're going with our web services, our generic web services capability of FME Server, in this case showing how it can support WFS for Inspire. So with that, just a couple things to remember. We are going to have an Inspire webinar number 2, where we're going to have 3 partners do some presentations on how they've used FME to solve Inspire problems. And is that March 11th?
Yeah, I believe it's the 11th, and I believe it was going to be, it's a tentative list, would be Conterra, Matria, and OneSpatial, so we'll see how that shapes up. But yeah, we certainly want to hear from our partners and some of the solutions that they have for Inspire, because they're really the ones supporting most of our users on the ground there in Europe.
Yeah, perfect. And we're going to be doing the world tour again this year, in addition to the 20th anniversary FME International User Conference in beautiful downtown Vancouver, Canada. So we encourage all of you to come there. It'd be great. It's going to be a lot of fun. You'll be able to meet all the SAFE staff. Ken will be there. Dean will be there. I'll be there. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, we'll be talking about XML, GML, and Inspire there as well. And this webinar is recorded, and there's many other recorded webinars at safe.com/webinars. And I think there you go. Yeah, and there's all the ways that that you can take advantage of the resources. FME PD came up a couple times during this as far as where to go for answers to stuff. So for the Atom feeds, for example, you just go to FME PD and say Atom, and you'd find it, and some other links right there.
Yeah, we're going to be adding more to FMEpedia, but there are some landing pages there for Inspire and GML writing, and we'll be expanding that. So
yeah, so thank you very much. Oh, some questions and answers. We've been answering questions as we've been going along, so we'll be sure to get all those answered and get back to you. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but is there anything you wanted to mention on the questions, guys?
I did see a couple people were asking about the XML templater for doing various things, and yes, it's still a very important transformer. It's simply that we don't need it anymore to create the actual Inspire GML, but it's useful for other things for sure.
Absolutely, because sometimes you're writing XML that doesn't even have a schema. So yeah.
And somebody did comment that the buildings schema, some of the I'm not sure if it's all the Annex 3 stuff or just buildings, were finalized in December. So So that means that we can really have a dedicated just to make sure we can write to that and support it as
Yeah, that's
do
awesome.
it the best job
Yeah,
we can. Yeah.
good. And there's our friend, the lizard or whatever he is, FME lizard. You know, again on the helm of the FME 24. Well, I guess you'll have to come to see that to see where he actually is. But and there's all our contact information. So thank you
So
all
I
so
guess
much.
Don, it has been a little bit of a sneak peek for 2014. So
Yeah, it is. We kind of snuck that in there, but we had
yeah,
no choice, Dean.
we had to. Yeah, really, I don't even try this at home with 2013. You got to go with 14.
You got to go 2014.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Good.
Well,
Okay.
thanks, Don. That's
Well,
been
thank you,
fun.
Dean. Thanks, Ken. That was great
Thanks,
stuff,
Ken.
guys. Always a
Thanks,
pleasure.
guys, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Yep. And if you think of questions later, please do reach out to us at support or contact any of us directly. We're here to help you and meet your Inspire requirements. And any question on Inspire, FME, or anything else, we're happy to help.
And there will be a mail out with the exact dates for the upcoming relevant webinars and with a link for downloading some of these examples and also a link to this WFS that we've been playing with today. We just didn't want to give you the link before the webinar in case everybody hit it at the same time.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right.
Great. Okay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Have a good day. Have a good night back in North America. Have a good day, folks over here.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.